Hi, I'm Frank. Today's video is going to be about the greatest military rescue in history. How over 600 POWs were saved from a camp up in Cabanatuan in Luzon, Philippines during World War II on January 30th, 1945. I think you're going to be surprised how well we work together with the Filipino Army and our U.S. Rangers. How together these forces saved our troops of 600 POWs who were about to die. At the end of this video, you're going to see previews of the movie called The Great Raid. It's with Benjamin Bratt and James Franco. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment and let me know what you think. I will see you soon.
The raid at Cabanatuan, also known as the Great Raid, was a rescue of Allied prisoners of war and civilians from a Japanese camp near Cabanatuan, Nueva Ecija, Philippines. On January 30, 1945, during World War II, United States Army Rangers, Alamo Scouts, and Filipino guerrillas liberated more than 500 from the POW camp, after the surrender of tens of thousands of American troops during the Battle of Bataan. Many were sent to the Cabanatuan prison camp after the Bataan Death March. The Japanese shifted most of the prisoners to other areas, leaving just over 500 American and other Allied prisoners and civilians in the prison, facing brutal conditions including disease, torture, and malnourishment. The prisoners feared they would be executed by their captors before the arrival of General Douglas MacArthur and his American forces returning to Luzon. In late January 1945, a plan was developed by 6th Army leaders and Filipino guerrillas to send a small force to rescue the prisoners. A group of over 100 Rangers and Scouts and 200 guerrillas traveled 30 miles behind Japanese lines to reach the camp. In a nighttime raid, under the cover of darkness and with distraction by a P-61 Black Widow night fighter, the group surprised the Japanese forces in and around the camp. Hundreds of Japanese troops were killed in the 30-minute coordinated attack. The Americans suffered minimal casualties. The Rangers, Scouts, and guerrillas escorted the prisoners of war back to American lines. The rescue allowed the prisoners to tell of the Death Marchon prison camp atrocities, which sparked a rush of resolve for the war against Japan. The rescuers were awarded commendations by MacArthur, and were also recognized by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. A memorial now sits on the site of the former camp, and the events of the raid have been depicted in several films. After the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941 by Japanese forces, it entered World War II to join the Allied forces in their fight against the Axis powers. American forces led by General Douglas MacArthur, already stationed in the Philippines as a deterrent against a Japanese invasion of the islands, were attacked by the Japanese hours after Pearl Harbor. On March 12, 1942, MacArthur and a few select officers, on the orders of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, left the American forces, promising to return with reinforcements. The 72,000 soldiers of the United States Army forces in the Far East, fighting with outdated weapons, lacking supplies, and stricken with disease and malnourishment, eventually surrendered to the Japanese on April 9, 1942. The Japanese had initially planned for only 10,000 to 25,000 American and Filipino prisoners of war. Although they had organized 2 hospitals, ample food, and guards for this estimate, they were overwhelmed with over 72,000 prisoners. By the end of the 60-mile march, only 52,000 prisoners, approximately 9,200 American and 42,800 Filipino, reached Camp O'Donnell, with an estimated 20,000 having died from illness, hunger, torture, or murder. Later, with the closure of Camp O'Donnell, most of the imprisoned soldiers were transferred to the Cabanatuan prison camp to join the prisoners from the Battle of Corregidor. In 1944, when the United States landed on the Philippines to recapture it, orders had been sent out by the Japanese High Command to kill the prisoners of war. In order to avoid them being rescued by liberating forces, one method of the execution was to round the prisoners up in one location, pour gasoline over them, and then burn them alive. After hearing the accounts of the survivors from the massacre at the Puerto Princesa prison camp, The liberating forces feared that the safety of the prisoners being held in the country was in jeopardy, and decided to launch a series of rescue operations to save the surviving prisoners on the islands. The Cabanatuan prison camp was named after the nearby city of 50,000 people. Locals also called it Camp Pangasinan, after a small nearby village. The camp had first been used as an American Department of Agriculture station and then a training camp for the Filipino Army. When the Japanese invaded the Philippines, they used the camp to house American prisoners. It was one of 3 camps in the Cabanatuan area and was designated for holding sick detainees. Occupying about 100 acres, the rectangular-shaped camp was roughly 800 yards deep by 600 yards across, divided by a road that ran through its center. One side of the camp housed Japanese guards, while the other included bamboo barracks for the prisoners as well as a section for a hospital. Nicknamed the Zero Ward, because zero is the probability of getting out of it alive, the hospital housed the sickliest prisoners, as they waited to die from diseases such as dysentery and malaria. 8-foot-high barbed wire fences surrounded the camp, in addition to multiple pillbox bunkers and 4-story guard towers. At its peak, the camp held 8,000 American soldiers, along with a small number of soldiers and civilians from other nations. Nations including the United Kingdom, Norway, and the Netherlands, making it the largest prisoner of war camp in the Philippines. This number dropped significantly as able-bodied soldiers were shipped to other areas in the Philippines. Japan, Japanese-occupied Taiwan, and Manchukuo to work in slave labor camps, as Japan had not ratified the Geneva Convention. The prisoners were transported out of the camp and forced to work in factories to build Japanese weaponry, unload ships, and repair airfields. The imprisoned soldiers received 2 meals a day of steamed rice, occasionally accompanied by fruit, soup, or meat. To supplement their diet, prisoners were able to smuggle food and supplies hidden in their underwear into the camp during Japanese-approved trips to Cabanatuan. To prevent extra food, jewelry, diaries, and other valuables from being confiscated, items were hidden in clothing or latrines, or were buried before scheduled inspections. Prisoners collected food using a variety of methods including stealing, bribing guards, planting gardens, and killing animals which entered the camp such as mice, snakes, ducks, and stray dogs. The Filipino underground collected thousands of quinine tablets to smuggle into the camp to treat malaria, saving hundreds of lives. One group of corregidor prisoners, before first entering the camp, had each hidden a piece of a radio under their clothing, to later be reassembled into a working device. The prisoners thus had several radios to listen to newscasts on radio stations as far away as San Francisco, allowing the prisoners to hear about the status of the war. A smuggled camera was used to document the camp's living conditions. Prisoners also constructed weapons and smuggled ammunition into the camp for the possibility of securing a handgun. As American forces continued to approach Luzon, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters ordered that all able-bodied prisoners be transported to Japan. From the Cabanatuan camp, over 1,600 soldiers were removed in October 1944, leaving over 500 sick, weak, or disabled prisoners. On January 6, 1945, all of the guards withdrew from the Cabanatuan camp, leaving the prisoners alone. The guards had previously told prisoner leaders that they should not attempt to escape, or else they would be killed. When the guards left, the prisoners heeded the threat, fearing that the Japanese were waiting near the camp and would use the attempted escape as an excuse to execute them all. Instead, the prisoners went to the guards' side of the camp and ransacked the Japanese buildings for supplies and large amounts of food. Prisoners were alone for a couple of weeks, except when retreating Japanese forces would periodically stay in the camp. The soldiers mainly ignored the prisoners, except to ask for food. Although aware of the potential consequences, the prisoners sent a small group outside the prison's gates to bring in 2 carabaos to slaughter. The meat from the animals, along with the food secured from the Japanese side of the camp, helped many of the prisoners to regain their strength, weight, and stamina. In mid-January, a large group of Japanese troops entered the camp and returned the prisoners to their side of the camp. The prisoners, fueled by rumors, speculated that they would soon be executed by the Japanese. On October 20, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur's forces landed on Leyte. paving the way for the liberation of the Philippines. Several months later, as the Americans consolidated their forces to prepare for the main invasion of Luzon, nearly 150 Americans were executed by their Japanese captors on December 14, 1944 at the Puerto Princesa prison camp on the island of Palawan. An air raid warning was sounded so that the inmates would enter slit trench and log and earth-covered air raid shelters. And they're doused with gasoline and burned alive. One of the survivors, PFC Eugene Nielsen, recounted his tale to U.S. Army intelligence on January 7, 1945. Major Robert Lapham, the American USAFFE senior guerrilla chief, and another guerrilla leader, Captain Juan Pajota, had considered freeing the prisoners within the camp, but feared logistical issues with hiding and caring for the prisoners. An earlier plan had been proposed by Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Anderson, leader of the guerrillas near the camp. He suggested that the guerrillas would secure the prisoners, escort them 50 miles to Debut Bay, and transport them using 30 submarines. The plan was denied approval as MacArthur feared the Japanese would catch up with the fleeing prisoners and kill them all. In addition, the Navy did not have the required submarines, especially with MacArthur's upcoming invasion of Luzon. At 11:30 on January 30, Alamo Scouts Lieutenant Bill Nellist and Private Rufo Vaquilar, disguised as locals, managed to gain access to an abandoned shack 300 yards from the camp. Avoiding detection by the Japanese guards, they observed the camp from the shack and prepared a detailed report on the camp's major features, including the main gate, Japanese troop strength, the location of telephone wires, and the best attack routes. Shortly thereafter they were joined by 3 other scouts, whom Nellist tasked to deliver the report to Mucci. Nellist and Vaquilar remained in the shack until the start of the raid. Mucci had already been given Nellist's January 29 afternoon report and forwarded it to Prince, whom he entrusted to determine how to get the Rangers in and out of the compound quickly, and with as few casualties as possible. Prince developed a plan, which was then modified in light of the new report from the abandoned shack reconnaissance received at 14:30. He proposed that the Rangers would be split into 2 groups, about 90 Rangers of C Company, led by Prince, would attack the main camp and escort the prisoners out, while 30 Rangers of a platoon from F Company, commanded by Lieutenant John Murphy, would signal the start of the attack by firing into various Japanese positions at the rear of the camp at 19:30. Prince predicted that the raid would be accomplished in 30 minutes or less. Once Prince had ensured that all of the prisoners were safely out of the camp, he would fire a red flare, indicating that all troops should fall back to a meetup at Pampanga River 1.5 miles north of the camp, where 150 guerrillas would be ready with carabao-pulled carts to transport the prisoners. This group would help to load the prisoners and escort them back to American lines. Mucci asked for volunteers who would die fighting rather than let harm come to those prisoners. Every single Ranger volunteered, and on January 28, 1945, they set out on their liberation mission. Guiding them secretly through rice paddies and kogon weeds were the Alamo Scouts, a 6th Army outfit that gathered intelligence behind enemy lines. The Scouts would provide information on the prison layout and the numbers and positions of the guards. Joseon's guerrillas would cover the Rangers during the attack, and if all went well on the return to base camp, too. A surprise attack and safe escape seemed more impossible than ever. Hearing gunfire and sure they'd be murdered, many prisoners hid. Pushing some prisoners toward freedom and carrying others, the Rangers hustled them to a site where Filipino civilians waited with Pajota's final gift: ox carts pulled by tamed carabao, water buffalo, for the prisoners to ride in, as Filipino guerrillas bravely held off the Japanese. And the Scouts stayed behind to fend off any retaliating Japanese. A strange band of prisoners, carabao, and former muleskinners traveled all night to the safety of the Allied front lines. About 1,000 people, including the U.S. Army, Filipino guerrillas, and unnamed Filipino civilians, had worked to set them free, resulting in the most spectacular and successful rescues in military history.
Hi, I hope you enjoyed the video and the previews of the Great Raid. I know I've been on Netflix, this showing on Netflix and Prime Video on Amazon Prime. So if you're looking for some, you got some spare time and you want to look at and see a good movie, that's it, The Great Raid. Please comment and let me know what you think. Till next time, I'll see you later.